The Christian writer and Catholic mystic Thomas Merton, he was writing back in the days when, as a human species, we were sending man to the moon. And he was reflecting on our quest to land on the moon, and he had this to say. He said, "What can we gain by sailing to the moon if we're not able to cross the abyss that separates us from ourselves? This is the most important of all voyages of discovery, and without it, all the rest are not only useless, but disastrous." Merton, of course, was not alone in thinking that self-discovery is basically the ultimate goal. Nearly every great thinker in history has emphasized the importance of knowing oneself, of self-discovery. The famous Greek philosopher, of course, Aristotle, he once said, "Knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom." The wisest voices in all of history have taught us the quest to truly understand ourselves is basically at the heart of spiritual growth. And this is why, over the course of this series, I have found theology and evolutionary psychology such intriguing dialogue partners, because both fields are very much concerned with how we, as humans, understand ourselves. What is it that makes us tick? What is it that drives us? And my hope is that we conclude the Evolve series this morning, that this whole series has allowed us to consider more carefully, more fully what it means to be human, how we understand our identity. And in many ways, the entire fall here at Nexus has been that, the beginning of the long journey into ourselves. The goal has been to head into the wilderness together to understand ourselves more fully. And when we think about it, this was Jesus' first wilderness experience as well. He heads to the desert and he faces some significant temptations there, but ultimately it's a quest to understand who he was, his identity. Now, as we wrap up our Evolve series this morning, I want to focus specifically on that. Who are we? Who are you? If you have your journals here this morning, maybe take just a few quick seconds to jot down, what exactly is it that defines you? What is your essence? What would you list as the things that make you, you? What are those things? Maybe while I'm talking here, think a little bit about that. When it comes to personal identity, of course, there's something very curious about Jesus and his teaching around this. He seemed very preoccupied with a particular notion around identity. Jesus frequently spoke about losing our lives or our identity in order to find it, which seems counterintuitive. But notice how important this idea was for Jesus. We don't have our screens here this morning, but there are so many verses in the Gospels that speak to this. Let me just run through a few of them. In Matthew 10, Jesus says, "Whoever finds his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life for my sake will find it." Matthew 16, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow me. Whoever wants to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for me will find it." Mark 8, "Whoever wants to save his life will lose it. Whoever loses his life for me in the gospel will save it." Luke 9, "Whoever wants to save his life will lose it. Whoever loses his life for me will save it." Luke 17, "Whoever tries to keep his life will lose it. Whoever loses his life will preserve it." John 12, "The man who loves his life will lose it. The man who hates his life in this world will keep it for eternal life." You start to get the idea. You can't escape this part of Jesus' teaching. It seems very clear that for Jesus, when it came to life, when it came to understanding our identity, something needs to be lost in order for something else to be found. But what? I mean, if you're anything like me, you start thinking about these teachings of Jesus, it can lead you into this sort of existential quagmire. So I was thinking, what does this mean? You can start circling these questions in your brain, because consider all the ways right now you just wrote down, the ways you defined yourself. Whether you thought about it in your mind or jotted it down, take the ways you define yourself and submit it to Jesus' teaching here. And I don't know about you, but when I do that, all I get is questions, a lot of questions. Like, Jesus, what exactly am I supposed to lose? And what is left of me if I lose my life? What part of me is supposed to die? And if I die, is there any Brad left there? If I die to myself or lose myself, am I no longer the same person? I mean, consider it on a practical level. If you die to yourself, lose yourself, does that mean the introverts here no longer are introverts? Or if you're an extrovert here, does losing your life, dying to yourself, does that mean you're no longer an extrovert? If your creativity is part of your identity, does that suddenly mean that dries up and you're no longer creative? If you're into sports, does that mean suddenly you don't like them? I mean, if you're funny, do you all of a sudden become overly serious and have no sense of humor? If you love Shakespeare or tennis or Downton Abbey or drinking wine, does it mean that those interests, those parts of you die? What exactly is it that dies? What exactly do we lose? Consider your responses to the question about identity. Think of all the ways you defined yourself just now. And if we take Jesus seriously, do those things die? Are they lost in the process? What exactly is supposed to happen? I mean, to me, it just leads to all these questions. I can get tangled up in my own thoughts. And what I've begun to wonder is if what Jesus had in mind is something very different than losing the core or essence of who we are. What I'm beginning to think is that Jesus, when he tells us to lose our lives, what he's referring to is all the things I am not, but have been led to believe I am. I'm wondering if what Jesus had in mind was dying and losing all the lies I've come to believe about myself. Perhaps you could say it this way. What Jesus is getting at is that we're called to reject all the ways our genes and biology and cultural conditioning provide molds or templates or archetypes or caricatures for us to live into. Let me try to illustrate. When Chris and I were engaged 1 year for my birthday, we went to Canada's Wonderland. And it turned out to not go so well from the very beginning. We got there really early at like 10. We went on the first roller coaster of the day. I think it was the Dragon Flyer or something, one of those older ones. And Kristen got sick. Like, she forgot to tell me she doesn't do well with motion. So she's like, I'm not feeling well. So there we are in Canada's Wonderland. It's like 10:30, and we can't go on roller coasters for the rest of the day. We've got some time to kill, so we're looking around, things to do. And we come across this caricature artist. And we're like, oh, why don't we have our picture done? That'd be great. Why don't we do that? So we were engaged at the time. We sat down. We paid this guy, I don't know how much, $5, $10, whatever. And he made this caricature portrait of Chris and I, circa 2003. There we are. And we were engaged, and we were looking at the time for a wedding favor for our guests at our wedding. And we came up with this idea. We thought, what if we hired this guy to come and he'll do caricature portraits for everyone at our wedding? Every single couple will get a caricature portrait done. So that's what we did. We hired him, and the night of our wedding, he showed up. We didn't know anything about this guy. I wish I'd done a little more investigative research. He showed up to our wedding. You have to remember, our wedding was quite the conservative affair. Lots of sort of people that you don't want to do weird things around. And this guy showed up, and I'm not sure if he got the memo. It was a wedding. He showed up in, I would say, casual attire. Not that I have a problem with that, but he showed up in shorts and a Hawaiian shirt, and on the front of his shirt were 2 naked women. And yeah, really classed up the joint, you know. There we go, we were stuck, so thanks. Anyway, that's what he thought was appropriate. So he shows up, and over the course of 2 hours, he does like 80 caricature portraits of our guests. It was a remarkable feat. Everyone was getting their caricatures done. I started to notice something at the end of the evening. As I looked around at the guests' caricature portraits, I began to notice they all looked kind of the same. All of the faces were kind of like a mold or a template or an archetype that he would work from. So everyone would kind of have the same face, usually based on some sort of celebrity. Now, I happen to think that for some reason he thought I looked like David Schwimmer, Ross from Friends. I don't know if you see it there. But every single person's face kind of had like a celebrity mold that he started from, and then he'd throw in some personal details, throw some glasses on, a little goatee, whatever. Everyone looked kind of the same with maybe some minor details. Which kind of makes sense to me, right? I mean, if you're going to pump out 80 of these at a wedding, you don't have a ton of time to catch all the intricate details about people's face. You simply work from a mold and add a few minor distinguishing details. And essentially what this artist did was define each of us at the wedding by an archetype or mold, and then dress it up a little to look unique, but underneath we all looked kind of the same. Which is, I think, exactly what Jesus is pointing us to here when he calls us to lose our lives, to die to ourselves. What I think Jesus is telling us is that life sort of hands us molds or caricatures or prototypes and calls us to live into them and form our identity around them and by them. We're taught to sort of play into caricatures, and we end up looking like these prototypes. I think for many of us, a long time ago, the voice of our biological drives, the voice of culture, the voices of influence around us, they told us who we were, and we believed them. And with these archetypes and messages about ourselves in hand, we begin to define ourselves by them, around them. And I think what Jesus is saying in these passages is this: if you want to find real life, true life, you need to lose those. You need to die to those, because your identity is so much larger than what an archetype or caricature can hold. And for me, this leads us back to evolutionary psychology. If you've been tracking with us over the course of the series, you'll know by now that evolutionary psychology sort of teaches that we all sort of have certain drives, and it pushes us all to sort of look kind of the same way. I mean, consider all the things we've explored in this series: family, gender, position, power, privilege, sex, and aggression. These are archetypes, you could say. We're sort of taught to sort of play into those roles. Let me go through each of them. Think about family for a moment. Biology tells us family is the most important. And because of that, we often take our cues about our identity from family. For some of us here, the voice of our parents has shaped our identity in a very profound way. For some of you, your parents told you you were stupid, and you've believed that for a long, long time. Others of us, our parents told us we were super extra special, and we believed that for a long time, and are now finding ourselves in midlife going, I thought I was really special, and now I just seem a lot like everyone else. Or think about how our siblings shape our identity. I have 3 brothers, 2 older, 1 younger, and I've been reading this stuff lately. It's driving me nuts. It's really killing me, about how oldest siblings do literally get all the smarts. And it makes sense to me now having my own kids. First kids get so much more attention. But it drives me nuts because my older brother happens to be a pastor who publishes regularly in the Mennonite Monthly. My second older brother is a professor of political science out at University of Victoria, and I've spent so much of my life trying to understand my identity in terms of them. Where do I fit in? If I'm not going to be the brain guy, how does that make me? Where's my role? What's my identity? Some of us have spent our whole lives not only wrestling with our parents' voice, but with our siblings as well. Or consider immediate family. What happens when the kids grow up and move out if you've shaped your entire identity as a parent? I've watched, my parents aren't here this morning, so I can talk about them. I've watched my parents struggle immensely with this, raising 4 boys and their whole identity being around their children. And as we've moved out, moved on, suddenly this identity crisis, I don't know who I am without my children. If we define ourselves as parents, what happens when they leave? Is there any part of me really left? Or think about those of us who have lost our partner, our spouse for some reason, divorce, maybe they've passed on. If you spend your whole life defining yourself by me and Kristen, me and someone else, what happens if we lose our partners Is there any me really left? We have been sort of conditioned to think that we are who we are because of our family. I am who I am in relation to my family. And what I believe Jesus is saying is we need to die to that. We are more than the identity our families give us. Or think about gender archetypes. I think I've told this story before, so if you've heard it, sorry. But when I was backpacking in Europe, my friend and I were going to visit Notre Dame Cathedral. We took the subway there. And we got off at our station, and the way I remember it, there's like hundreds of stairs from the subway station that leads to Notre Dame Cathedral, and we were tracking up these stairs, my friend and I, when behind us we heard this yell from a woman, "Stop that man, he has my purse." And my friend and I turned to look, and right at that moment, a man went bounding up the stairs, purse in hand. And a friend and I looked at each other. Remember, he said, "Don't do it, Brad." He said, "Don't do it." This guy was bounding up the stairs 3 or 4. It's funny the things you remember. It was like a split-second thing, but I took off after this guy. And remember, I was wearing Birkenstocks and socks, which isn't a great look. Remember, he was going up like 3, 4 stairs at the time, and the stairs were only small. For some reason, I was like just doing 1 stair at a time. So it was like, stop. I don't know why. I took off after this guy. And a man in front of me tried to stop the purse thief. He grabbed him. The purse thief bit this guy's arm, drew blood. The man screamed, "I've been bit." Let go. So I'm next in line. And I get to him and I grab him. And in that moment, this surge of adrenaline, this guy made quick work of me. Like, I've never been so terrified in my life. One hand on the purse, one hand on me, and he swung me around like a rag doll. It was all I could do to just hang on, Brad, help. And I'm hanging on, and oh my goodness, I'm terrified that I'm gonna go over the rails, fall to my death. He's swing me this way, that. And finally, this big German guy, I can only assume he's German because it sounded German to me. Sounded German. He comes and he grabs this purse thief. I'm not kidding. Grabs him, throws him on the ground, and then sits on him. He just sat on him until the police showed up. Remember, the police got there. He was squirming. The guy was saying, police showed up. And all of a sudden, everyone, to this German guy, "Oh, what a hero, what a hero. Oh, thank you for saving a woman's purse. Thank you. And I remember just sort of sulking in the corner there, waiting for someone to affirm me, right? Like, if it had not been for you, son, But no one said anything. And I remember Dan, my friend, and I went to Notre Dame, just sat in there after. And I remember, now I love telling this story. At the time, I felt so embarrassed. I felt so embarrassed afterwards because somewhere along the way, I had picked up this idea that as a male, I need to be cool and strong and powerful. I know it's weird. Where would I have possibly gotten an idea like that, right? And that day I was forced to face the fact that I might not be physically strong. I might not be a powerful man. And now I can laugh about it, but I remember at the time, like, it really bothering me and sitting there in Notre Dame Cathedral and sort of forcing myself to examine, why do I feel the need to be this mighty male warrior archetype? See, until that incident, Hollywood had sort of defined for me what it meant to be a man. Sort of the William Wallaces of the world. And somewhere in my psyche, in that split second, I just, that's what men do. Damsel in distress, villain, I'm gone. And I realized at the moment, I can't live up to that archetype. I had been given this identity or this idea of what it meant to be a man, and I realized that day I couldn't be that even if I tried. And I think what Jesus is saying to us here is you have to kill those notions of masculinity. You have to lose them in order to find life. Or consider position archetypes. I was reading just this week's in, I think it's Vox magazine, how retired men struggle deeply with depression. And why? Because once you sort of say to yourself, I'm done with my job, how do you define yourself? I mean, what happens when the positions we hold in life are gone, or what happens when they're taken from us? Retired men is just one category, but why? If we identify ourselves with a position or role in life, what happens when someone else takes it? When someone else can do it better? What happens when our role is no longer needed? What happens if we don't have an important role or position in life? See, without our positions of power or roles in life that define us, a lot of times we're not sure, I don't even know who I am. Or sexual archetypes. Evolutionary psychology teaches us that our sexual drives are key to our identity, which of course can become very confusing in terms of identity. What if our sexuality doesn't fit the prototype? How do we define ourselves then? What does it mean to be rejected sexually? What if we face constant rejection sexually? What happens to our identity then? What does always feeling like an object sexually do to our identity? What happens when we've been sexually manipulated? How does that impact our identity? And again, I think Jesus' word says we have to die to those notions. You are bigger than those. Consider even Jesus archetypes. A lot of us, I think, grew up, or some of us did anyway, with sort of a conservative, maybe fundamentalist archetype of Jesus. This is what it meant to be a Christian. And over time, we realized that A, we didn't like that archetype, or B, we couldn't live up to those notions. What happens then? Or for those of us who consider ourselves maybe more progressive, liberal, whatever you want to call it, Christians, what happens when you can't live up to the archetype of Jesus or Christianity that you've created? In so many ways, we create archetypes, or archetypes are created for us, and we find that we can't live up to them, and then we start to question, who am I? What is my identity? And in certain ways, I would say this, our biology, the voice of cultural influences, they shape our identity, but the key question concerning our identity is this: what is it about you that doesn't change regardless of circumstance? What is your essence? I mean, who are you? Who are you really? If I took away family and gender and positions and titles and roles and sex and power and aggression and religious and political affiliations, if I took all of those away, what is left of you? If I said to you, define yourself this morning, but don't use any of the things I've just talked about, how do you begin to define yourself? What's left? And I think the sad reality for many of us is that without those, we don't know how to define ourselves. What we come to realize is that for much of our lives, we have simply defined ourselves by prototypes, by archetypes, by caricatures, ones that have been just simply handed to us. And I think the thing about Jesus is when you look at his words, then they start to make a ton of sense. I think what Jesus came to show us is this: eventually all of those things will be taken away from you. That's just life. You will lose them. That's the transitory nature of life. If you define your life by these things, what will be left of you when they're gone? Whoever defines their lives by these will lose it, because eventually they will be gone. But when they're all taken away, what is left of you? And the thing is, this morning, I don't have the answer for you, because I'm not even quite sure myself right now. I don't even have an answer myself. What I've come to realize in my own journey is how terrified I am to lose these things, because I don't know how to define myself without them. And what made the exercise of doing the posters for you last week so meaningful and almost felt very vulnerable for me is I've come to realize that I define myself so much by NEXUS. It's become such a big part of my life. But what would I be if I take this away? Is there still a Brad there? Is there a Brad without the Watson? Is there a Brad without the man, without the husband, the father, the pastor of NEXUS? Is there still something about me unique that's still there when I take all those trappings away? And I honestly believe this: discovering that essence is, I believe, the wilderness path that Jesus is calling us to. Like Jean-Paul Sartre's advice, he once said this: we only become what we are by the radical and deep-seated refusal of that which others have made of us. How much does your family define you? Your gender define you? How much do positions you hold in life define you? How much do political affiliations define you? Religious affiliations define you? I like how Richard Rohr says it. He says this: Jesus would say, unless the grain of wheat die, it remains just a single grain. This means that this concocted false self, this manufactured identity that is who we all think we are, has to go. That's what the language of being born again really means. It's not some kind of magical transaction that takes place between you and God, but the death of the passing self, the one you have created for yourself. That's what has to die. Until that false self dies, you don't really know who you are. This, I think, is what Jesus is pointing to. And it's a journey that I've been on myself for a while. I think it's a journey that we're traveling together this year. I hope it's one that will continue traveling down together. I like it in Galatians chapter 2. Paul is reflecting on his own journey, his own life, his own story. And I love how he says this, Galatians 2:20. He says, "My old self has been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me." This was Paul's experience, dying to himself by shedding all of the identity caricatures that had been handed to him. He found himself identifying with Christ. Christ was alive within him. But that can sound cliche. What does that mean? I think the primal foundation for how we understand ourselves' identity is this. We take it from Jesus' baptism. At our core, we are seen, loved, and blessed by God. We've talked about that here before. I think all of us, if we can, that's the place to start with our identity. We are seen, loved, blessed by God. But what does it mean moving out from there? You know, for some of us when we were young, right, we were taught that Christ alive within us meant that we asked Jesus into our hearts, which I think partially gets at it. As some of us grew older, I think we start talking the language about Christ living inside us means that we model our lives on Jesus, doing what we thought Jesus would do, asking ourselves that famous question, right, WWJD, what would Jesus do? Which isn't bad either, but I've come to see things a little bit differently as of late. Recently discovered a quote by the author Dallas Willard. It's really rattling my tree in some really good ways. What does it mean to have died to ourselves, to have lost our lives, to allow Christ to live in us? Willard says this, I love it. Discipleship is the process of becoming who Jesus would be if he were you. I love that. Mind blown for me. You see, it completely shifts the way we understand who we are. Instead of asking, what would Jesus do? I'm going to live my life how Jesus would live, which when you think about it, he lived 2,000 years ago in a culture completely different than ours. I have no idea how Jesus would live his life. Instead of that, turning around and saying, if Jesus were the unique person I am, how would he live? If Jesus were given my personality, my interests, my gifts, my situation in life, what would this Jesus be? What would this Jesus do? That to me is a reframing in a powerful way. But it requires us first to answer that big question, who are we outside of the trappings of the voices, of the caricatures that we've been handed, outside of gender and family and positions and religious affiliations, political affiliations, outside all of these, who am I? What is left of me without them? If I lost all those things, who would I be? I've started taking this journey, and it's been bizarre because it's hard when you take all those things away to start defining yourself. And I know for me personally, I've narrowed it down to a couple of things. I'll share maybe just one with you, but I think in my essence, one of the things that I'm grateful for is a sense of humor. I can say, hey, I think I've got a good sense of humor. And to me, if you took that away, Brad would cease to be Brad. And I think one of the things that we're so reluctant to do is ever be grateful for certain aspects of ourselves, right? I know some in this room do gratitude projects. I love seeing them, but it's interesting whenever we do gratitude projects, how often they're about relationships or things or moments, how rarely we ever stop to say, I'm really grateful for this aspect of my life. Because it feels sort of egotistical, doesn't it? Like, didn't it sound weird when I'm like, hey, I think I got a great sense of humor. I'm really grateful for that. You're like, that's a little weird. But how often, if we really take away the trappings and try to understand who we are, we have to start with a place, what are those things I'm grateful for about myself? understanding who I am without all of the trappings. And once I understand who I am in my essence, my core, then asking myself, who would Jesus be if he were me? You know, I've come to think that the whole Christian journey, our whole wilderness journey this year at Nexus, can probably be summed up in two important tasks. First, discover who we are. Who we really are, apart from all the false selves that we've created for ourselves, but also the ones that have been created for us. Find who we really are. Do the work, figure it out. But then second, ask ourselves this question. As the unique person that I am, who would Jesus be if he were me? How would he use my personality, my situation in life, my gifts, all of those things? Who would Jesus be if he were me? One of the things we want to, I'll ask the band actually to come right now. All of you are going to get a envelope with, I don't even know what they look like. An envelope with paper. An envelope with a green piece of paper. One of the things that we thought we would do throughout the year, particularly in this series as we talk about evolving, is try to have some projects for us to do that we can look back on later. And John Dinner actually was the beginning. He gave me the beginning of this idea. I'm not sure if it's exactly the way you envisioned it, but one of the things we're going to ask you to do as you reflect on who you really are is this. You're going to get a letter with some paper. What we want you to do is this. Picture yourself 20 years ago, your past self. Maybe when you were a teen, maybe you were when you're 20, however long ago. 20 years ago, 10 years ago, whatever it was. We want you to write a letter from your past self to your present self. Thinking, why? What's the deal with that? Remember right when you're coming into that age of identity and you're starting to try on different masks and you're starting to think about your future, wouldn't it be interesting to write a letter to your current self from when you were, say, 20? For those of you who are younger than that, when you were 10, 15, whatever. What would you say to your present self? Would you like who you've become? Would you be disappointed in some ways? How would you feel about who you are right now? I've been thinking about this, and I actually am planning, I've got this letter in my mind from young Brad to present Brad, and young Brad says some bad things to present Brad. But present Brad is also going to write a letter back like, you little... Anyway, you don't know what you're talking about. But I think it'll be an interesting exercise for us to do, to consider who we were and write from that perspective to who we are today. It might reveal to you some of the ways you've shaped your identity. And our plan is this. Write it this week, stick it in an envelope, put your address on it, seal it. Nobody's going to read it. And it will be one of the things that we mail back to you at the end of the year. So sometime in May, June, you'll get the surprise letter, and it will be from your past self to you. And I think it's going to be the awesomest thing ever. So imagine how that'd be great. So we're going to pass those out at the end, or you can pick them up. On the way out, you can pick those out. But I hope throughout this series, we've been able to think a little bit more about our identity, and hope this gives you some food for thought this morning. That's our quest. We'll